Well, let's talk now to Jacob Rees-Mogg, who chairs the influential pro-Brexit European Research Group, who says if the UK does have to accept a long extension to Article 50, then it should become obstructive. This is a tweet from Jacob Rees-Mogg a little bit earlier on. In a tweet he wrote, if a long extension leaves us stuck in the European Union, we should be as difficult as possible. We could veto any increase in the budget, obstruct the putative EU army and block Mr Macron's integrationist schemes. There we are. Let's talk to Mr Rees-Mogg, who's in Somerset now for us. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Well, first of all, on that tweet, some people have replied to that tweet saying it's rather childish.
Well, is it? There's a duty in the EU of sincere cooperation, which we have followed dutifully. But I don't think we've had that in return during these negotiations. I think they have negotiated in a way that was designed to split up the United Kingdom, which can't count as sincere cooperation. So I think that if we're stuck in a system that 17.4 million people voted to leave, we should use such powers as we have to show them that they're better off without us, and therefore when it comes to the next multi-annual financial framework, if we're still in then, we should simply veto it. And Mr Macron wants much further integration, and that would require a new treaty, and we would be able to obstruct that. So the EU should be careful about what it wants, and of course European parliamentary elections are a particular problem, because it seems to me likely that we would elect people who are rather more extreme than the sort of people we're used to in British politics. And I don't think that's good for British politics or for European politics.
It sounds like you're rather resigned to being inside the European Union for quite a while longer.
Well, I think we should leave. We should have left a week ago at 11 o'clock at night. Mrs May said we would leave on the 29th of March, I think over 100 times. If we can't do that, we should leave on the 12th of April. But if the Prime Minister does get her extension, or an even longer extension, which is being talked about, then I think that is overturning the democratic vote we had in 2016.
A lot of people would say you could have helped her leave, you could have helped her fulfil that promise to leave on March the 29th if the European Research Group and the DUP had voted for her deal long ago.
Well, her deal is a bad deal. It costs us $39 billion for nothing in return, leaves us as a vassal state for 21 months, and leaves the European Court of Justice still interfering in our affairs even once we had left. So it's not a good deal. I did come to the conclusion in the end that it was the best of a bad option, and I voted for it. And of the 110 Eurosceptics who voted against on the first vote, only 28 voted against on the third vote. So my side of the argument has compromised to a very, very significant degree because we see, by and large, her deal as the least worst option.
But lots of people are saying you've let the perfect become the enemy of the good, in the words of the Prime Minister and others. And essentially your tactics have backfired. You have pushed her into the arms of the Labour Party, and that's why she's now trying to get a compromise with them instead.
Oh, I think that's rather exaggerated talk, if I may say so. Nobody pushes the Prime Minister about. She has all the prerogative powers at her control. She sets her cabinet, she appoints her ministers, she determines how the negotiations are carried out. The Prime Minister has negotiated remarkably and effectually and has left us in this position, and now she's gone trotting off to Jeremy Corbyn, who a week before she said was dangerous and unfit to lead the country. That is the Prime Minister's responsibility. You can't hold up individual and obscure backbenchers for this.
But from your point of view, surely the Prime Minister's deal as it was would be better than a deal that she came to with Jeremy Corbyn, if she ever does, that would be maybe centred around, who knows, a customs union.
I agree with that, and that's why I voted for her deal last Friday. I still think her deal is a bad deal, but I came to the conclusion it was the least worst option. So yes, I accept that point.
It sounds like the talks may not be going that well from what we can hear between the government and the Labour Party. Presumably you'd welcome that.
Well, you know better than I do. Neither Jeremy Corbyn nor Theresa May particularly confide in me the inner workings of their talks, so I assume what's being reported by journalists is likely to be accurate. I want us to leave the European Union, and we have an opportunity to do that on the 12th of April, just a week from now. And I think that would be a preferable option and would deliver on not only the referendum result, but also on the general election result, when 83% of candidates stood on manifestos saying that they would respect the referendum result.
If there were to be agreement between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn on a way forward, on a compromise, is it your view that a future Tory leader, whoever succeeds Theresa May, would simply, or could simply, rip up that agreement?
Well, Parliament cannot bind its successors. That is a basic constitutional point. So if the electorate decided to have a leader who was more committed to Euroscepticism, a future Parliament would be able to change things. That is our basic constitutional principle. And that becomes quite interesting also in what we were talking about at the beginning. If there were to be a long extension, the EU could not count on Mrs May being there leading the country throughout that long extension. And it may find that there was a leader who was less sympathetic to their stratagems.
But would that be honourable for a Conservative Prime Minister to reach an agreement, if she did, with the Leader of the Opposition, and then for the next leader of the Conservative Party or government simply to tear that up?
Oh, completely. You must remember that Conservative voters, Conservative members and Conservative members of Parliament to a large degree are opposed to this approach that is being taken. They are in no way bound by what one leader agrees in these circumstances. It's a matter for voters, and voters are free to determine the course of policy in the future. And as I said, Parliament cannot bind its successors. That is a great point of democracy, that one Parliament cannot be held up as the Parliament which other parliaments have to accept the legislation from in future or for all time.
And it's very clear you hate what Theresa May is doing at the moment, but it's partly your fault again. Your tactics have backfired.
Well, hate is a strong word. Let's try and avoid words like that. I don't support what she's doing. I think it's bad politics and I think it's bad for the country. But I don't want to get into the more emotional language.
OK. All right. You don't like what the Prime Minister is doing at the moment. But again, isn't it the fault of your tactics which have backfired that she is still Prime Minister and could be potentially until the end of the year because you tried to get rid of her and that failed?
But this is, I'm afraid, trivialising the issue. It's not about my tactics. It's not about what I think. It's what 17.4 million people voted for. And Theresa May promised to deliver. She said over 100 times we would leave on the 29th of March. It is upon her honour that we are in this position. It's not the fault of backbench MPs, the ERG, not even of Jeremy Corbyn. The Prime Minister carries the can. The buck stops with her.
Well, yeah, but the buck also sort of stops with you because you're here in part because you're part of the ERG, which has been very pivotal in all this voting and all this discussion and all this debate. And what I'm putting it to you is that you've blown it, in a sense, with the way that you voted on her deal and the way that you've tried to get rid of her as Prime Minister.
Well, I'm afraid I'd rephrase it. I'd say that if the Prime Minister had delivered on her Lancaster House speech, on her manifesto promises, and even on the speech she made at Mansion House, which involved a great deal of compromise, which people in the ERG were willing to accept, and indeed pro-Europeans were willing to accept, it commanded widespread support. If the Prime Minister had stuck to that, then she would have managed to get her deal through. So once again, it is the leadership that is in charge. They do the negotiations. They, until recently, controlled the legislative timetable. You can't ascribe blame to those who are not running things. We would have delivered had the Prime Minister lived up to her promises.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, very grateful to you for your time this evening. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.